Right, hello, good morning everybody. Can everybody hear okay? Awesome. I guess it's afternoon now. I'm Megan. I'm the moderator of Mental Illness in Media, the panel today. I'm going to start by just introducing our panelists here. Should we start with Elliot?
Hello. Oh. Hello. I am Elliot. I use he or they pronouns. I will probably be talking mostly about anime, and I have schizoaffective bipolar type 2.
Hi, this might help. Hi, I'm Catherine. I use they, them pronouns. I watch all sorts of fun media, and read fun media too. And I have ADHD, and some other exciting things that affect both physical and mental health, so, like fibro.
And I'm Megan again, use she, her pronouns. I'm a mental health therapist, so I'm going to be doing a lot of like, what is that like for you and how does that feel on this panel? So you can look forward to that. And I also have like, just depression, run of the mill. Does what it says on the tin.
My name's Allison Summer. I'm a writer, and I have a fun mix of anxiety, depression, OCD, and ADHD. And I have a TED Talk about panic disorders if you want to Google me. That's fun.
I'm Niles. I used to dabble in film criticism at Slant and The Point and RogerEbert.com, and I'm just happy to be here.
All right, thanks everybody. So we've all pretty much got our own experiences with dealing with mental illness or neurodiversity. I'm curious about when you're thinking of media representation, are there any examples you can think of that really landed for you, that made you feel really seen, where you were like, oh, this person gets it?
Is this question for us?
I'm coming up blank.
I think a lot of people this year who I've heard of, many people who have anxiety were responding to Beau is Afraid by Ari Aster, and how that first 40 minutes of that movie in particular play as really the year's funniest film in terms of you being in this character's head and how hyperbolic it is for him in this isolation, how he's responding to all the stimuli. And it gradually becomes darker and darker, and it's a 3-hour movie, so it can be a lot for many audiences who want to get out. But kind of the point of the movie, and I think a recurring theme with mental illness I think in its most vivid representations in cinema, is that it's something that's really hard to get out of. A mental prison a psychological prison is something that can crush your soul, your identity. And so I think that's one example from this year that I think is striking.
There was a Klingon quote that really got me, because I wasn't expecting it from a Klingon, talking about how mental illness is one of the most fierce battles that can be fought, and it's an honorable battle, because it's inside you every day. But at the same time, like, it's not always a battle. So it was nice to see something positive from a Klingon and about mental illness, but also feeling a desire to challenge that narrative of mental illness as a battle, because it isn't always, and it doesn't have to be.
I realized earlier after I said it, I meant to say type 1, not type 2 for bipolar. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of representation for bipolar in general. It's like a lot of depression, anxiety, like even just normal schizophrenia and schizoaffective bipolar has a lot more representation. So I don't particularly have any examples to give for what I have that I relate to.
Yeah, I can't think of any bipolar depictions. Do any of the audience members can think of any? Yeah.
Silver Linings Playbook.
Silver Linings Playbook?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's like the one.
What about Shameless?
Oh, Shameless, yeah.
There's football. There's one in the original Degrassi. Like with Craig.
That's a deep cut.
Yeah.
Original Degrassi, yeah. I'll resist from singing that theme song, so you don't so with the, difficulty coming up with good representation, I'm sure we can all think of some representations that really miss the mark on stuff based on your own experience or what you knew. I'm really curious to hear, first from all panelists, I'll throw it out to the audience, what really got it wrong and why?
Most of the horror genre.
Yeah, let's not talk about Split.
I'd say a lot of the crime drama too, where people oh, this person, I've been binging Criminal Minds for some reason, so it's on my mind. People, they find some sort of mental health medication in this person's cabinet, and it's oh, this person's crazy. The amount of weight that they give, oh, we found Lexapro, oh no. Simmer down.
Oh no.
It's just Lexapro.
Right.
They mentioned Abilify once, and I was like,
Yeah, there's been several times they've been looking for clues about the unsub, the criminal in that show, and they list off the mental health medications. I'm like, hey, that's what I'm on.
But
Are you
at
killing
least they're
people?
on medication. Yeah. They're getting their treatment that they are looking for.
if anything, that's a good sign.
You would think in real life that would be a good sign, but it seems like on these shows it's oh no, they're on mental health medications. That means they're mentally unstable. And it's or they're treating that instability.
Yeah, I really hate the trope of people flushing their meds down the toilet. Hey, that's not a proper way to dispose of your meds. It's just a terrible idea. If you can't make your own SSRI
Store-bought is fine.
store-bought is fine. Yeah, exactly.
It's that whole oh, I want to find my true self. Well, but your true self, with or without the whole neurobiology? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't feel like any of my meds that I've been on have ever affected my personality. It's just been about energy levels, that type of thing. It hasn't affected how I feel about things.
yeah.
Thinking that something you put in your body is going to affect your true self, I take to the other extreme. You eat food every day. You have to have that to survive and be a happy human. Are you affecting your true self with that hamburger? I don't see it as any different as something you need to get by on a daily basis. If you need the meds, you need the meds. It's okay.
Arguably, your food does impact your mental health.
But your true self or your mental health?
Good point.
We got a question or a comment.
One was, I have absolutely taken those meds that wiped away all of the good things about me. It was not a good time. I was on mushrooms on the couch. Bad. Mushrooms on the couch have a bad time getting help too because they go calling. The other thing was, back to the crime drama thing. They miss a very great potential opportunity. PMDD means you're bipolar, only it's attached to your menstrual cycle, so you're really normal until you aren't. That would be a fantastic excuse for a crime drama.
That's come up a lot actually in some true crime shows and podcasts. Well, okay, I shouldn't say a lot. I've seen it a handful of times.
But that is a lot.
Across all of the crime shows that I watch, which are most of them.
I think there's a danger in that one, is representation is good, but you also don't want to have a writer's room full of men being she's on her period, she's going to kill people. Yeah.
Yeah, in the back.
What do you all think of the depiction of Carrie in Homeland?
Carrie in Homeland?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I'll pass this on.
That That's a TV show on
It's old.
Showtime.
The thing about having so much media out there is that we haven't seen it.
We may have never watched the same
What do
show.
you think about Carrie from
Well,
Homeland?
it's another bipolar example.
Oh,
But, yeah.
Oh God, they were using it as like a threat to her ability to be a secret agent or whatever. I didn't really like the premise, but I was intrigued by the trailers.
Wasn't this also, and I don't know if it, more media, but Fleischman is in trouble if people have saw that show on Hulu, where I believe the Claire Danes character may have had a bipolar.
I think that is Homeland.
No, Fleischman in trouble. She like disappeared on her family for
Right.
a little bit, and
Yeah.
like then they're arguing about like her fitness as a mother, and like
And she had some sort of breakdown.
yeah. And so she was portrayed
After-
as like unreliable and unstable.
Yeah. Is she in Homeland too, Claire Danes?
Yes,
Well, heck.
hence the confusion.
I love our bipolar rep right there. Is it good or bad? Who's to say? So with, I don't think so, but who's to say? I don't know. Does anyone know? So one thing I was curious about with this being, us talking a lot about like science fiction, fantasy stuff, is you get some like mental illness coded characters that are non-human. Like you might have an anthropomorphic animal, or I'm thinking like robots. Like if y'all have read the Murderbot series, that robot is definitely coded as like neurodiverse, like on the autism spectrum, in the way that it like deals with people, or like Marvin the depressed robot from Hitchhiker's Guide. Like, how do y'all feel about those kind of representations when they're not human? Is that like helpful? Can it be harmful? Where do you come down on that?
I found Marvin really challenging because, like, on one hand, yep, I feel you, but also it's way more constant and two-dimensional than depression is for a human. At least this human.
I think a lot of those representations are problematic because they show it so blatantly on the surface what depression is, and depression can look like someone who's outwardly, like they're masking depression is real. That doesn't make the depression less horrible. You see that from, some celebrity suicides that you like, of people who always seem positive and upbeat, but then they weren't. So I think those, they're very one-dimensional when they're just mopey, I'm sad. Like, I love Eeyore, but at the same time.
I think that when it comes to Marvin, I find something consoling in that representation, though, that is like a salve. And circling back to this question of the true self and mental illness, and going, I began with, I was afraid from this year, but let's go way back to Hamlet. And not just Hamlet, but at the same time Don Quixote, which were written almost concurrently. And Don Quixote is introduced as this very ridiculous character. But there's a scene in the Sierra Morena where he meets a character we know as Cardenio, who's had his heart broken and just gone totally mad. And Quixote meets Mad Cardenio, who's almost, we would call him a schizophrenic nowadays. Now, of course, this is pre-psychology by several centuries. And it's one of the most moving scenes in literature, where it's like a talking cure is going on, where the one person sees himself in the other. And what happens is a kind of metamorphosis. Now, of course, it ends with Quixote screwing up again and more laughter ensues, but in that moment, Cervantes created, I think, a kind of a breakthrough in literature. And Shakespeare at the same time was doing similar things with Hamlet, with Lear, and in his depiction of Lady Macbeth, which nowadays we could say that those depictions are antiquated, but in their time, I think they really show us human beings in a way that a lot of art doesn't. And I mean, the thesis of both Hamlet and Don Quixote is when we talk about the true self, there is no true self. We're masks all the way down. And that's a lot to take in. And for Hamlet, that's the awful truth from which he may go mad, or he may be simulating madness. We don't know.
Getting real philosophical up in here. Oh yeah, question.
I can lighten the mood with animation if you'd like. So things like BoJack Horseman discussing things like depression, or reading a little bit more optimistic Steven Universe's depiction of various things like I know in the kind of follow-up to Steven Universe Future discusses a lot of dealing with trauma and what accountability do we have for ourselves in order to kind of make our own journey with mental health. And those are really great things, especially when they become so accessible for something that's generally made for a younger audience too.
I cannot tell you how many times I have told my therapists over the years about Steven Universe and how much of a difference it made in how I related to my emotions, and going through Steven Universe at the same time as going through a DBT program was pretty fantastic, because there were a lot of echoes, and like I could pull up specific songs and being like, oh, you mean this?
Amazing. Question over here.
Just on that, one of the things that I loved about the Steven Universe is in Steven Universe Future, it's directly referred to as, like, I think you may have Gen PTSD. Like they said it as a thing right there instead of just being vague about it. And then one of the other things I liked in the Murderbot books was the way that they also explored how Murderbot was treated by the humans once the humans figured out that, oh, you have some serious social anxiety, and they went out of their way, especially, I can't remember her name, Dr. Mensa, to be like, no, we have to respect the fact that Murderbot needs to deal with people differently. We have to respect that, we have to work with it. And I liked that about it.
Yeah, I think the naming of the disorder or the condition can be really powerful when it's represented well.
When you bring up the other characters reacting to it, I think that's almost more telling than bringing up a disorder. You could have a perfectly accurate portrayal of a mental illness, but if the other characters react badly to it, you sitting at home being like, well, I guess I'm not going to tell people about my OCD because everyone then suddenly was being all weird about it on this show. So other characters, the way they react, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if there have been other analogies that you pulled from media that have helped you explain what the experience is like. Like I know a lot of folks have used the Dementors in Harry Potter as a way to explain depression. Just it's like, no, it's more than being sad. It's like this all total body experience. Any examples like that, either from our panelists or the audience?
My mind is stuck on that other Pixar movie.
Inside Out?
Inside Out, thank you.
Emotions one.
That was another one that came up in DBT, and the therapists that were running the group were even like, yeah, we use that for the teen group. It really helps with describing what emotions are like and whether or not you listen to those emotions.
I would point out, for me, The Aviator, and how the form of the picture matches the psychology of the protagonist in the sense that it's a very streamlined, beautifully mounted, perfect thing, and yet at the same time there's something latent that's etching away at this individual that gradually is pushing on things and then just swallows him at the end. And the way that it it's so, everything is so on the exterior fine, and yet at the interior just black and hollow. That is something that I found incredibly cute in how it struck me, and really nailed the quiet nature of how mental illness can operate.
So I know I just decried horror movies, but I was just remembering a couple of them that were also really excellent in externalizing metaphor making, whatever. Baba Yaga? Not Baba Yaga. Shoot.
The Babadook?
Babadook! This is not my day. Baba Yaga is a Russian witch in the woods that will
It's
steal you.
the house that runs on chicken feet.
House that runs on chicken feet. No, Babadook. I keep thinking Baba Shook. But it's such an excellent depiction of grief, which can end up in the mental illness spectrum. Grief can also turn into more chronic depression, and it was really, really cool seeing how they resolved the grief at the end, and how, you know, the Babadook didn't go away, but they took care of it in a way that made it a little less impactful and more like, yeah, no, this happened. I lost someone and it was awful, and that person still has a special place in my heart, in my life, and I also need to move forward.
So, this is going to be an obscure reference. One of my favorite shows that I connected with a lot was Akunohana, or Flowers of Evil. It is an manga, which is how I originally read it, but it also has an animated form that a lot of people aren't into. They did a live action and then animated over it. But the way they did it like that on purpose because it was supposed to be unsettling, and they morphed the faces, and it was actually really fascinating to me once we got past the initial part where everything's normal. But essentially what happens is there's this boy who really likes this girl. I think it's been the second since I read it. They're in like 8th or 9th grade for the equivalent of this, and he steals her gym clothes. He's weird. But this girl in class that nobody likes witnesses him doing it, and so she is very sadistic. She essentially starts blackmailing him, following him around, all these other things, making his life more and more chaotic and bad as things go on, until he starts to fall into her delusions with her. And things just escalate even more. And while I do not like her depiction, she's depicted as the schizophrenic one. It's not good depiction of schizophrenia, but as someone with schizoaffective bipolar, I actually related to the guy's experience with her a lot more as if she was the hallucination and pulling him into the delusions, which is just like my interpretation of it. Which is kind of how I explained it to my therapist, where it's like, it starts off small, there's this really unsettling presence, and then things escalate and escalate until you fall in with the unsettling presence, and your delusion is stronger.
Kind of like Fight Club?
I haven't seen.
I just thought of a bunch of YA books that have good representation, so I'll save those. If people want to chat YA books, I've got some reps. Any other some things from the audience, like characters that have been popping out to you where you're like, oh yeah, this has yes, the yellow shirt.
Hi. I'm kind of curious about your take. Now, this obviously has some extenuating circumstances surrounding it, about how they portrayed, especially early in the first season of Legion, David Haller's
PID.
Anybody got any takes on Legion?
I haven't seen it.
I mean, I thought it was a really interesting way to portray it, but I also took it with a grain of salt because he's also a mutant.
Right.
So, you know, obviously that is going to complicate things a little bit.
How they treated him at the beginning, like through his life,
Yeah.
being labeled with schizophrenia, even though things were.
Well, and arguably he has both, but I think that, especially I think with Legion showing how he turned to substance abuse, resonated with me because I work with a lot of clients with serious mental illness, and a lot of them struggle with substance abuse as well. So I think that part resonated with me. It was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
That's connecting my brain to Jessica Jones as a depiction of like a superhero who is dealing with a lot and not well at all. Very much diving into the addiction as a means of just coping, trying to hold on a little bit longer.
Yeah, I would like to see more depictions where a happy ever after doesn't fix the mental illness, but instead you learn to live with it. I think there's a lot of that where someone is like deeply suicidal or really depressed, and then they like meet the love of their life, or their life circumstances change and it's just magically better, and that like rarely happens. So yeah, more depictions, please. Yeah.
I always think it's interesting that PTSD, like the most common ways we see it is with veterans in media. And then when people who haven't served say that they have PTSD, people are like, well, you know, that's the thing that soldiers get. Like that's not, you know, and like trying to figure out the different ways. Because it's usually portrayed by like they have flashbacks and there's like bombs going on and stuff. And like,
It Follows is a really good representation of PTSD.
that movie has a great soundtrack.
It is excellent. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I was just saying it works so well that it adds to the creepiness.
Yes.
But like, yeah, looking at PTSD in ways that aren't related to like military service and like how it shows up, or how triggers can happen for people, like regular people with PTSD.
Yeah, I love when trauma gets treated like trauma instead of just being like, well, I'm fine now, I went through this horrible thing and it's just another day.
I think if everyone's seen the Doctor Who episode where they see Vincent van Gogh, I think that is a really good job because you meet him and he's in a bad place, and by the time, you know, the doctor and Amy and stuff leave, they're like, oh, he's in a good place, it's gonna be great. Amy runs up thinking, we cured Vincent van Gogh's depression, but no, he still killed himself. Because you can't just fix it, and people with depression can have great days, but that doesn't make it go away.
The way the doctor explains it to Amy as well was like really moving, where he was like, you gave him a good day, a good few days, I think it was.
Pile of good things.
Yeah,
The pile of good things doesn't-
added to the pile of good things, but it
Build
didn't.
his resiliency.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just nice that even though things still ended bad, he pointed out that you gave him something good, even if it didn't change things.
Wasn't there like an extra painting when she came
Yes.
up too?
No, I think there was something added to a painting.
Oh yeah, it was something added.
There's like a TARDIS explosion. An optimistic note to end on, but I'll be around if folks want to chat some more.
Are we already?
Thank
What?
you. Wait, what?
I thought it was an hour. Is it an hour?
Yeah.
We've got another half hour.
What? Oh, okay. Oh, that's great. I was like, this went by so fast. Okay, just kidding. Good, because we haven't gotten to trauma yet. Okay, in the back there.
What do you guys think about Monk?
I hate
About what?
Monk, please.
Yeah, as someone with OCD, but something Monk is problematic because it's so over the top.
Yeah.
He's so over the top, and even the less over the top depictions, even if you dial Monk back, people in their head they think they're dialing it back because this is so over the top, and they still get OCD wrong. There's like no depictions out there of OCD. If has anyone even heard of pure OCD, which is just the obsessive portion, And the fact that for some people, you know, medication can control a bunch of the compulsions, but not the obsessions, or vice versa. Yeah, more real life OCD depictions would be really awesome. And
two things off that. So in his Dark Materials, there's some expression, it's never named, of OCD-like symptoms, and it's trying to show that she's not coping well and is crazy. But she's doing specific counting techniques, and you can see her calming down as she's doing these techniques that look like OCD. And then also, my stepsister also has OCD and totally identifies with Monk, to like, even with not, would rather die than vomit. So, ends up on both ends.
There's one that's not explicitly OCD that a lot of people disagree with, but I will die on this hill. Bruno from Encanto.
Well, we don't talk about Bruno.
So with Bruno, just about every time he enters a room, he goes knock, 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 knock on wood, like the same thing every time, and always ends with hitting himself in the head, which I always thought was kind of funny. But there's this other things that he does where it's just like, oh my god, these are compulsions.
And they're just accepted.
Yeah.
No one's trying to change.
Nobody really comments on it. They're just kind of happening.
Oh, that's just something Bruno does.
Yeah. That's
I mean,
something
we don't talk
that
about
makes
him.
them mad.
But he seems to do it as also whenever he thinks something bad is going to happen, like the knocking on wood to stop bad luck.
I was kind of wondering if anyone can think of healthy, contained depictions of like, this person takes their meds and they have these minor symptoms, so you know that they have this problem, but this is contained and they go to therapy, and like it's the healthy version, not the off the rails hiding in a closet version.
I love the depiction of borderline in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, because she does DBT in it, and for the first 2 seasons, it's, you know, she's doing these really erratic, like, decisions, and you're just like, what is going on with this person? But she's so lovable and caring and just like a really well-realized character, and then she gets her, like, diagnosis of borderline, and she's like thrilled about it, because she's like, great, I have a name for this, and like, I have like clients who are just like really giddy, where they're like, hell yeah, I have ADHD, like I'm not lazy, like this is just how my brain works, or like, oh, this is like a personality complex that I fall into. Like that just makes it so much easier to deal with when you have like a name and a description for it sometimes. And she goes through like DBT, and you just see her like getting better and then like relapsing on her behaviors, but like really, really trying and being a good person in these other areas. And oftentimes borderline gets so villainized. So I loved that depiction. Anybody else?
So there is not medication, but more of a therapy situation where things are contained in a silent voice. He doesn't explicitly go to therapy. It's mentioned by the older sister after a suicide attempt. But it shows that he is still struggling with his depression and guilt for him bullying a girl in middle school. But it is much more contained, especially towards the end of the movie, where he's able to lead a pretty normal life other than having just minor episodes where he feels extremely guilty.
I think therapy might be, I'm just pulling Will Hunting out of the air in terms of therapy work, or like going back to, say, Pap's Secret of a Soul from 1926, which is basically about psychoanalysis. It's sort of a propaganda film for psychoanalysis. The breakthrough happens, and he doesn't want to kill his wife anymore.
Yay!
Thanks, I'm cured.
I'll take not wanting to kill my wife.
Yeah, the friend here.
How about the depiction in Midsummer?
Midsommar.
Just her, you know, she's dealing, I mean, it seemed like there were pre-existing mental health issues with her family, obviously with her sister, and then she had the PTSD, and then even just kind of the whole talk about the state that she was in and how that made her vulnerable and susceptible to the love bombing and everything that happened then within the cult.
Totally, yeah, the psychology of cults is in there a lot. Really interesting. Thinking about like traumatic portrayals of people going through trauma, I was thinking about like the Lore Olympus webtoons and what a good depiction of trauma that had. I was like shocked. I was scrolling on my phone. I was like, wow, they really nailed this. Oh, go ahead.
Earlier, I was going to mention we were talking about veterans being one of the only depictions. A lot of recent media is really focused in on sexual assault as PTSD mentions. You can continue. Sorry.
Oh no, that's all I got. Can you think of other like examples that came to mind?
Give me a second.
Thinking of an example, or having an example of not specifically PTSD, but definitely trauma. The Adventure Zone.
The Adventure Zone, yeah.
Yeah, specifically, well, it struck with me, the Ether Sea season that they had somewhat recently. Sorry, it's been a second since I listened to it. Devo. I'm sure there's a lot of people here who aren't familiar with it at all. Devo basically was raised in a convent, to put it in a way, and left with like a lot of religious trauma, and as somebody who has some religious trauma, that it spoke to me a lot, especially as he's supposed to be like in his early 20s or something, and it spoke to me, especially because like that's kind of how I was like right after I left the church, of like really angry specifically at like individual people and not really actually processing anything. I don't know, like kind of can't believe.
Totally, yeah. Getting a depiction of religious trauma can be really powerful to see. Yeah, in the back there.
Actually, going off that, that's my favorite depiction of non-combat PTSD and religious trauma is actually Silent Hill series. Because, well, Alessia Gillespie, I grew up in Kansas, you know, I wasn't taught evolution. I mean, not on record. But they, you know, it really can be insane to be in a small town and be a vulnerable child, and your parents, the church, the doctors, the whole town doesn't have your best interest in mind. They have your control in mind. And she is treated, locked in a hospital basement for 7 years, just suffering from her wounds. And it's a great representation of this dissociative identity disorder as well, I feel, because she then split her soul and sent it to be adopted by Harry Mason, the protagonist of the game. And sorry, I've got to go out on a tangent here, but you know, every time her soul is regrounded, it's manifested as a baby, a newborn, and a representation of having to start over. And I think it's great that how that fear and that trauma can make you paranoid. And even though the town looks like a nightmare to her, it looks something else. It looks like fun to others sometimes, but she can make others see the nightmare too. But sorry, she as she's, you know, an adult in the clergy, and she has blonde hair, where she has naturally light hair. In the good ending, you know, she got she's going out to the night interview us a lot, but she's come to terms with who she is and who she's been.
Yeah, totally. Great example, like that reinvention. Yeah.
Has anyone here ever watched the show Alphas? It was a sci-fi original series.
Yeah, like a long time ago.
So the premise of it was kind of a takeoff of like the X-Men, where there are like humans born with unique abilities, but they were a lot more needed in terms of like how ridiculous they were. But oftentimes, not always, but they would come with certain consequences. So one of the characters, he had what we call hyperkinesis, where he could instinctively know how to move or do something in order to like accomplish a goal, but it didn't kick in all the time. It wasn't automatic. He had to like concentrate, and when he failed at something, though, he would have such depression about it or struggle with it that it made it really hard for him to maintain jobs and do other kinds of work or maintain relationships. Another character, she could amplify her senses and like super zoom in on things with vision or sense, but she was also had difficulty being around people because she would get overstimulated very, very quickly. She was Indian, so her parents trying to kind of constantly like get out and get married, but she couldn't be around other men. Like cologne would bother her a lot of the times. It was that, and then also, and some different characters, they would have like the degree of the struggle was kind of different. One character, he was an FBI agent. He had adrenal glands that could increase his strength and speed, but he also constantly had a bit of an aggression problem with talking with people. So he had, and they were all gathered around, and the kind of the leader of the group was actually their therapist, who was kind of helping them work through their difficulties and kind of dealing with life. And like the main plot was always there was like they would be brought up with the FBI to try to like solve a case, but a lot of the story was simply about them learning to live and kind of balance their life and their abilities. And it was a really interesting show. I really liked it. I was kind of wondering kind of like thoughts on that, but also kind of the thing where it's like that, the common thing with like mental illness where you get a super ability, but also a negative kind of counterbalancing thing, and kind of your thoughts on that.
I can talk about that with ADHD. That hyper focus, when I get in the flow, I can do amazing things. I can deep clean my apartment. You will never see a wood floor sparkle so nicely. But at the end of that hyper focus period, I come out utterly exhausted. I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to make food, but I am hungry. Because you can bet I have not eaten anything during that hyper focus because I didn't notice it. And I probably also really have to pee. But the next day, like I'm probably gonna scuff up that floor and ruin the deep cleaning that I did the day before because I am exhausted and I just dragging.
That sounds a lot like my media episodes, but they last like a couple days.
Yeah, in the back center.
That actually brought to mind a podcast that's been long gone now, actually, but it's still out there. I'm sure if you look for it, it's called The Bright Sessions.
Oh yeah, I love
And
the Bright
they had-
Session.
Yeah, I mean, and I was just thinking about the first character. I believe she's the first character you meet, and she's like, she has panic attacks, and at the end of her panic attack, she's time traveled somewhere.
Oh dear God, it's
And
so good.
they have to try to control her panic attacks because where is she? You know, she's like in the middle of World War II or something. And she's like, this is awful, as the panic attacks aren't bad enough, and then you end up somewhere weird, and she doesn't know how to do that. But then you meet this whole cast of characters who all have a gift wrapped in some kind of trauma or terribleness. Yeah, it's wild. It was really well done. There are a number of seasons, but it's old. You'll have to go looking through old podcasts for it.
The idea of a gift wrapped with the bad made me think of The Magicians, which does a lot of related mental health things, and Quentin discovering that like, yes, magic is real. Magic is, he's getting to do magic. Why isn't that fixing him? Why can Quentin or Elliot, or why can they still be depressed when they know that they're in this magical place that they've always dreamed of being in? I really identified with that. Like, I should be happy. Everything I list means I should be happy. Things are the way I wanted, but it's not there. That show, it just in general touches on PTSD and substance abuse from a couple different perspectives. I think the way that they handle Elliot's substance abuse is a lot more deep than a lot of other shows.
The Umbrella Academy.
Elliot's like,
I got really confused for a second.
The character.
Yeah, in the back.
If any of you have seen the show Moon Knight, I was just curious if there were any comments on how they depicted mental illness in that.
Yeah, Moon Knight, like the dissociative identity disorder stuff. Is that what is like portrayed? Yeah, DID is so controversial in general, and like TikTok made it extra topical.
one of the things I think in that show, so throughout most of the show, they show two of within the system that is Mark Spector. And I think it's complicated because none of them, towards the end, they kind of flesh out where he started to realize that he might have DID, and but the premise of the first season is he doesn't realize that he has DID, but he's an adult man, and so he's been living multiple lives all concurrently.
Heroes.
And so in the comics, he's a very unreliable narrator. You read a comic and you're not really sure what's real, what actually happened versus what he's actually doing. And so I think it's a really hard thing to translate onto screen, because you're watching a show and you're like, so what part of this was real, what part of it isn't real? And so I think they approached it with a reasonable amount of care as far as not making him seem, completely he's a bad person because he has this mental disorder, but it's also a superhero thing, so it's really hard to
Mental health is something writers use a lot to create that unreliable narrator.
Right.
I say write what you know.
Yeah. And so I'm curious how people feel about mental illness being used as a plot device that way.
I did want to say another unreliable narrator that's really good is Challenger Deep, the book. It's about a boy with schizophrenia, and just how, it's from his perspective, so we see him upset with the distrust of his family because they don't understand what's happening, and things just escalate from there to the point where, half the time he's on a pirate ship.
Two things come to mind with that. One is Sucker Punch. And the other I forgot. Dang it. Oh, Heroes. That's right. But that was not related to what you were saying. It was related to talking about superheroes with that good and bad. Specifically, the character whose other identity is a badass murderer who's protected her all this life, and that's very much reminiscent of DID, and just with one split though.
Yeah, the whole mental illness as superpowers thing, is that empowering or is that flatten the experience?
Yeah, it kind of gets into autism with the constant savant syndrome, where it's yay, autism's good. It's everybody who's autism is genius. They have superpower, photographic memory.
But what if you're not?
Yeah, no, I just look at that and I'm like, oh, I don't have that.
I think to answer your question, I think it's frustrating sometimes because it kind of flattens the experience, because when you meet someone and you're like, oh, I have autism, or oh, I have ADHD, kind of what Elliot was saying, they expect you to perform these things, and you're like, no, I just have really hard time with organization.
I really like anime.
I could talk to you a whole lot about comic books for 2 hours, but that's really not going to impress you. So I think sometimes it's it's nice to have examples to help people wrap their head around maybe the concept, but also there has to be like caveats of like, I'm also not actually a superhero, or you know what I mean? Like, not every person with autism is solving scientific and mathematical equations all the time. Like,
I'm not a surgeon.
well,
Not everyone is Sheldon.
the giant groan that is Big Bang Theory, it's like Sheldon. It's like, that's not the autistic experience.
There's also that the creators refuse.
Sheldon series.
Yeah,
Right.
but also the creators refuse to acknowledge Sheldon as autistic, and
Right.
I think the main reason is because they want to keep making fun of it, and if he's autistic, they're ableist.
So yeah, so it kind of creates that double-edged sword of like, there's representation, but it's also with caveats.
Yeah, they say he's not autistic.
Yeah, I think there is like a risk of like over pathologizing or like glamorizing the pathologies, and I think I'm like growing a cardigan down my arms as I speak, but like younger kids. But I think like some of them are like, yeah, I want to stand behind this identity because like I'm really struggling, and I want to use this terminology to like indicate how much I'm struggling. And like the fact is like the human experience involves like really struggling, and sometimes it's like, well yeah, like that's being human is what you're going through. And sometimes it's like, you know, maybe it's not to the threshold of like a diagnosable level, but that doesn't negate the fact that you're really struggling. So I think sometimes there is like just fear that like if you don't have that label, that what you're going through isn't legitimate. And I see that cropping up more. Yeah, lots of comments.
I just want to say I really dislike your illness is a superpower is an inquiry that you're ill. And I'm also not really wild about you have this power and then you've also thrown on this mental illness. Because I think that also kind of flattens it, is it's like, this is your punishment, this is a bad thing. It's like, this is a thing that I can take care of and figure out.
I think it's more of like a natural consequence as opposed to a punishment.
Yeah, depending on how it is. Like, because sometimes, I think the examples that were being listed earlier, it's like I can understand how these two things are related. But sometimes it's like you get this excellent power, and then you go crazy. Or
Like in Wheel of Time, if a man uses magic, then he's going to go mad, period.
And what does that even mean?
I kind of wonder your thoughts on the idea of needing to create a false sense of like fairness and merit-based value, because if you have, you have this mental illness, but you get this special bonus to it, it's like, well, it's a balancing act. The whole like, Daredevil can't see, but he has all the super senses, and then he will get to what else, all the kind of stuff like, so it's like being able to see, but with like other senses. Or at the same time, it's like if someone is doing really well, or has all these things, like, well, they have to be still some kind of struggle, because that wouldn't be fair in that particular sense. I'm wondering if maybe this idea that we have to like judge people by a certain level of merit, means we have to imagine that everyone has some kind of weird balancing effect. And in fact, some people just can't do something really well, and that's it. Well, other people can do things well, and there is no negative to it. You think that merit aspect and that false sense of fairness comes into a lot in these kind of narratives?
It is really hard to accept that life isn't fair and that we aren't, created fairly, because we're not created, we just come into this world.
I don't know, team, what do you think? Do your mental illnesses give you additional powers? Maybe empathy. I would say empathy is a good byproduct. Like when you go through stuff, you can empathize and be like, oh yeah, I know what that feels like, and it's really hard.
And then there's the other side of that where, I have plenty of friends who just, they can't see past their own troubles. Their own mental illnesses are clouding their vision. So it's not fair.
It's not a superpower?
It's not a superpower.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think there's a lot of really great independent game developers that have done a really good job showing integrated experiences with mental health. So, for example, Night in the Woods, May, the main character, has a lot of dissociative episodes kind of going through this transition period in her life. Or you have something like Wander Song, where the main character is extremely positive, extremely bubbly, but has times where he goes through deep depressions and has a hard time kind of kind of dealing with the fact that the main premise of the story is he's not the hero, and he's trying anyway, and it's not going well. And I think a lot of that is because you have, in independent scenarios, a lot of creators that have the freedom to kind of express the story they want to, because they're not trying to cater to a large audience. They want to make something and gold mine and they go for it, which is an exciting venue when you want to portray mental health.
Cool, good recommendation.
What were we talking about before that question?
I don't.
Because I had a really good train of thought.
Does your mental illness give you superpowers?
Yes, okay, so I work in memory care and hospice as a caretaker, and it's not a superpower, but I do find myself much more able to empathize with the memory care patients. I communicate better with them. It's really strange to me, especially. It's like, why do my coworkers who are neurotypical, like they are very confused by these people. Like they don't understand when they're having issues versus like, I have a great time talking to them. Like some of what they say just like makes sense to me, like their thought processes, even though like their mind is deteriorating. Like I find myself able to communicate better with them than some neurotypical people.
So it's good when the person who is neurospicy is identifying this as a superhero, for yourself. The other side of it drives me kind of crazy is when people say, oh, neurotypical assign magical powers to, or something positive to a disability or a mental illness, like the Daredevil thing, maybe think of it too. Just, I have a brother who has Down syndrome, and people love to say crap like, oh, they're such happy people. And it's like, no, he's annoyed right now because my parents don't let him eat hamburgers every day. Like,
I'd be mad too.
The people who are, given that without their permission, almost.
Adjacent to that, and touching on dementia, something that be hard for a lot of us who are younger to identify with. Has anyone seen The Father with Anthony Hopkins? Which really, I don't know what it's like to have dementia. My father was in hospice last year. His mental acuity was pretty good even with Parkinson's, but that movie is a horror film. It's a drama, but you are in his mind in the way that one character, a daughter, melds into someone who's been out of his life for decades. It makes the claustrophobia of the experience and what this old man is going through, it's absolutely shattering. And it really makes you think about what some people with dementia may be going through. And anyway, I recommend it. Hopkins won the Oscar for it, and you will see why.
There's an episode of Adventure Time that's kind of similar to that with the Ice King. With the crown, and there's like a whole maze in his head, and they have to go and rescue it. And she gets to see young Simon, and it's pretty heart-wrenching because it's like seeing those glimpses of a dementia patient when they're themselves, and then they slip away again.
Yeah.
Yes, in the front.
So super quick comment. I tend to separate my neurospiciness from my depression and anxiety because I feel like the neurospiciness sometimes makes me feel more like I have superpowers or the high performers or things like that versus the depression and anxiety are just what the hell. But my question for the panel is I know something for queer representation, a lot of times we're looking at now of I just want to see queer characters that the entirety of the story is not about their queerness, right? I don't want it to be this whole coming out story or the homophobia. I just want them to be queer and be a spy or be, right? Just be in things. And I'm curious what you want to see next in terms of mental health representation, or if there are good examples of just hey, this is just a part of their life, which I know we kind of got it earlier, but then went away.
And with an E. So Anne, her whole life, it follows her life. She's adopted from a orphanage, goes to live with this brother and sister.
Based off of Anne of Green Gables.
Yes. And she deals with a lot of PTSD throughout the series, but it's not the focus. The focus is her coming of age, her finding love, going to college, all
Her
this other stuff.
imagination.
Yeah, her imagination. She has a fantastic imagination. She loves literature. But throughout this, she deals with some struggles. Like when she first goes to school, she doesn't understand some of what she went through, where she witnessed one of her previous foster mothers being assaulted by their husband on multiple occasions, and brings it up to the other girls at school. And they are all horrified, and she doesn't know what's going on. But there's also depictions of her having panic attacks, that type of thing, but it's not the focus of the story. And things like that just really made me feel seen. So just like having it there and visible, where there's some scenes where it's the focus, but it's not where the story is going.
I would say After
so
Sun,
really quick.
and I'm just gonna read After Sun.
After Sun?
If anyone's seen After Sun.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, more nuanced representation, please. That was our panel. We're at time. Thank you so much for coming.